14-year-old Emily Carter had always believed that as long as her mother was beside her, everything would somehow be okay. Their small apartment in Chicago wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love. Every Friday night they ordered pizza, watched classic movies, and laughed until they forgot about the problems waiting outside their front door. Those simple moments became the memories Emily would treasure forever. Then everything changed. After nearly 2 years of fighting cancer with incredible courage, Sarah Carter passed away, leaving Emily with a silence she had never known before. The apartment suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar. Her mother's favorite sweater still hung by the door. Her coffee mug remained on the kitchen counter, and her favorite novel rested beside the couch, exactly where she had left it. Emily couldn't bring herself to move any of them. With no one else able to care for her, Emily had to leave Chicago and move to the small town of Maple Hill to live with her grandfather, Thomas Carter. They were practically strangers. He had always kept to himself, and after Emily's mother married and moved away years earlier, the family slowly drifted apart. The 3-hour drive felt endless. Busy city streets disappeared behind long highways, colorful autumn forests, and quiet country roads. Emily rested her forehead against the car window, wondering if life would ever feel normal again. Grandfather Thomas's house stood alone on a gentle hill overlooking the town. It was a large Victorian home with faded white paint, an old wooden porch, and tall oak trees that seemed older than anyone living there. The house looked beautiful, but it carried a strange feeling, as though it had been holding on to old memories for decades. Thomas greeted Emily with a quiet smile and carried her suitcase inside. "I know this isn't easy," he said softly, "but we'll figure it out together." Emily wanted to believe him, but grief had made trusting anyone difficult. That night, unable to sleep, she looked out her bedroom window. Beyond the backyard, hidden beneath thick vines and tangled bushes, she spotted an old iron gate. Behind it was what looked like a forgotten garden, swallowed by nature. The next morning, Emily wandered into town. Outside a small bakery, she overheard 2 elderly women speaking. "That's Sarah Carter's daughter," one whispered. "The one staying at the old Carter house?" the other replied. "I hope she stays away from the locked garden. Some secrets should never be uncovered." Their words echoed in Emily's mind for the rest of the day. Later that afternoon, curiosity pulled her toward the garden. As she stood beneath a massive oak tree, something glinted beneath the roots. She knelt, brushed away the dirt, and uncovered a small, rusted key. She turned it over in her hand, unaware that this forgotten key was about to unlock the biggest mystery Maple Hill had hidden for 50 years. 14-year-old Emily Carter never imagined that the hardest goodbye of her life would also be the beginning of a mystery that would change her forever. Until a few weeks ago, Emily lived with her mother in a small apartment in Chicago. They didn't have much money, but they had each other. Friday nights meant homemade pizza, old movies, and hot chocolate, even during the summer. Her mother, Sarah, always believed that happiness came from the little things. For nearly 2 years, Sarah fought cancer with remarkable courage. Even on the days when she was too weak to get out of bed, she smiled at Emily and said, "Promise me one thing. Never let sadness stop you from finding something beautiful in the world." Emily promised. She just didn't know how difficult that promise would become. After Sarah passed away, the apartment felt painfully empty. Emily couldn't bear to move her mother's favorite coffee mug or the sweater hanging by the front door. Every corner of the home held a memory, making it impossible to believe she was really gone. With no relatives nearby, Emily moved 3 hours away to the quiet town of Maple Hill to live with her grandfather, Thomas Carter. They barely knew each other. He had always been a quiet man, and after Emily's mother left town years earlier, the family slowly lost contact. The drive from Chicago seemed endless. Busy highways faded into winding country roads surrounded by forests painted in shades of red, orange, and gold. Maple Hill looked peaceful, but Emily wasn't looking for peace. She wanted her old life back. Her grandfather's Victorian house stood on a hill overlooking the town. The faded white paint, tall windows, and wide wooden porch gave it an old-fashioned charm, but it also felt lonely, as if it had been waiting for someone to bring it back to life. "I know this is difficult," Thomas said gently as he carried her suitcase inside. "We'll take things one day at a time." Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. That night, unable to sleep, she looked out her bedroom window. Beyond the backyard, hidden beneath thick vines, stood an old iron gate. Behind it, she could just make out the outline of a forgotten garden. The next morning, while walking through town, Emily overheard two elderly women talking outside a bakery. "That's Sarah Carter's daughter. The one staying at the old Carter house? I hope she never opens the garden." Emily slowed her steps. "Why?" the other woman asked. "Because some secrets were buried there long ago." Those words stayed with Emily all day. That evening, curiosity led her to the ancient oak tree beside the garden wall. Something glimmered beneath its roots. She knelt, brushed away the dirt, and uncovered a small, rusted key. Holding it tightly, Emily felt an unexpected chill. Somehow she knew this wasn't just an old key. It was the beginning of a story that someone had desperately tried to keep locked away for 50 years. Emily barely slept after opening the forgotten garden. The image of the overgrown paths, broken stone fountain, and countless flowers fighting to survive stayed in her mind. More unsettling than any of it were the fresh footprints she had discovered in the damp soil. They were too recent to ignore. Someone else had been inside the garden. The next morning she returned before sunrise, hoping to catch whoever had been there. A cool mist covered the ground, and the garden looked almost magical in the early morning light. Birds sang from the old oak trees, and dew sparkled on the tangled vines. Everything seemed peaceful, yet Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As she carefully followed the footprints, she heard a faint sound, a soft whimper. She stopped. The sound came again, weak and frightened. Pushing aside a thick patch of bushes, Emily discovered a young golden retriever trapped beneath a fallen tree branch. His golden fur was muddy, and one of his front legs was scraped. The frightened dog looked at her with gentle brown eyes, his tail barely moving. "It's okay," Emily whispered, kneeling beside him. "You're safe now." Using all her strength, she lifted the branch just enough for the dog to crawl free. He limped a few steps before turning back and gently licking her hand, as if thanking her. Emily smiled for the first time in weeks. "I guess we're both a little lost," she said. "I'll call you Sonny." Sonny stayed close as Emily explored farther into the garden. Near the crumbling stone fountain, he suddenly began digging excitedly beneath a patch of ivy. "What did you find?" Emily asked. She knelt beside him and cleared away the loose soil. Buried beneath the roots was a small leather journal wrapped carefully in faded cloth. The cover was worn, its edges cracked with age, but someone had once taken great care of it. Emily's heart raced. She slowly untied the cloth and opened the first page. In neat handwriting, faded by time, were the words, "My name is Lily Harper. If someone is reading this, it means I never got the chance to come back." Emily stared at the sentence, her hands trembling. Who was Lily? Why had her journal been hidden inside the garden? Before she could read another page, Sonny suddenly growled. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Emily freeze. She looked up. Across the garden, just beyond the broken greenhouse, someone was standing perfectly still between the trees. The figure wore a long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, making it impossible to see their face. Emily blinked. A second later, the stranger turned and disappeared into the forest without making a sound. Clutching the old journal tightly against her chest, Emily realized she wasn't the only person searching for the garden's secrets. Someone else had been protecting them all along. Emily stood frozen, staring at the place where the mysterious figure had disappeared. The trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, but there was no sign of anyone. Sonny let out another low growl before moving closer to her, as if he sensed the danger too. Taking a deep breath, Emily slipped the old journal into her backpack. "Let's go," she whispered to Sonny. "We'll come back later." The entire walk home, her mind raced with questions. Who was Lily Harper? Who had been watching her? And why would someone hide a journal inside a forgotten garden? Back at the house, Emily waited until her grandfather left to run errands before carrying the journal upstairs. She sat beside the bedroom window where sunlight spilled across the pages and carefully opened it again. The first entry was dated October 12th, 1976. Today I found my secret place. Father says the garden has been forgotten, but I think it's waiting for someone to love it again. Every flower has a story, and someday I'll know them all. Emily smiled. Lily sounded cheerful, curious, and full of hope. She turned another page. The entries described long afternoons spent planting flowers, feeding birds, and sketching butterflies. Lily wrote about how peaceful the garden made her feel whenever life became difficult. But as the pages continued, the tone began to change. People in town keep arguing about the Carter property. I don't understand why grown-ups lie so much. Emily frowned. The Carter property? That was her grandfather's house. She read faster. I heard Father tell Mother that someone wants the garden destroyed. He says the truth must never leave these gates. Emily's pulse quickened. What truth? Before she could keep reading, a folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages. It was an old photograph. The edges were faded, but the picture was still clear enough to recognize. A smiling 12-year-old girl with blonde braids stood beside the very same stone fountain Emily had seen that morning. There was no doubt. It was Lily Harper. Emily flipped the photograph over. Written on the back in blue ink were 6 chilling words. Don't trust the man in green. A sudden knock at the front door startled her. She quickly hid the journal beneath her bed and hurried downstairs. When Grandfather Thomas opened the door, an elderly man stood on the porch. He wore faded green overalls, a weathered straw hat, and carried a bundle of freshly cut flowers. The moment Emily saw him, her heart skipped a beat. Green overalls. The message on the photograph echoed in her mind. Don't trust the man in green. The old man slowly looked at Emily, offering a quiet smile that was impossible to read. I've come to take care of the old garden, he said softly. Emily couldn't tell whether she was looking at a harmless gardener or the man Lily had warned about 50 years earlier. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the message written on the back of Lily's photograph. Don't trust the man in green. Yet everything she had seen so far suggested the opposite. Oliver Green spoke gently, cared for the forgotten garden, and seemed genuinely saddened whenever Lily's name was mentioned. The warning and the man standing before her simply didn't match. Sonny sniffed around the broken greenhouse while Emily stepped closer. You knew Lily, didn't you? She asked. Oliver lowered his eyes. She was like the granddaughter I never had. Then what happened to her? He sighed deeply. People believe they know the story, but they've only heard rumors. The truth is far more painful. Before Emily could ask another question, Oliver noticed the corner of the old journal sticking out of her backpack. You found it, he whispered. You knew it was here? I helped Lily hide it. His voice trembled. She asked me to promise that no one would read it until the right person came along. Emily's heart raced. Why me? Oliver smiled sadly. Because you're the first person in 50 years who came looking for the garden instead of running away from it. He carefully brushed dust from an old stone bench and sat down. Lily believed every broken place deserved a second chance. She thought if someone brought this garden back to life, the truth would finally bloom with it. Emily opened the journal to the next unread page. If anything happens to me, don't blame Mr. Oliver. He tried to protect me. Emily looked up in surprise. So the message on the photograph, Oliver nodded slowly. It wasn't talking about me. Before he could explain further, the sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed outside the garden. Oliver's face immediately lost its color. Hide the journal, he said urgently. A black pickup truck rolled to a stop outside the Carter house. A tall man wearing an expensive dark coat stepped out and looked directly toward the garden. Emily had never seen him before. The man smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. Grandfather Thomas walked onto the porch, and the smile disappeared from his face. What are you doing here? Thomas asked coldly. The stranger glanced toward the garden gate, as if he already knew Emily was standing behind it. I've come to buy your property, he replied. One last time. Thomas's answer came without hesitation. The house isn't for sale. The man chuckled. It will be. As he turned to leave, his eyes met Emily's for a brief moment. Then he said quietly enough for only her to hear, "Some secrets are worth killing for." Emily felt the journal grow heavier in her hands. Whatever Lily had discovered 50 years ago, someone was still willing to protect it at any cost. Emily couldn't get the stranger's words out of her mind. Some secrets are worth killing for. That night, sleep was impossible. She lay awake listening to the wind rattle the old windows, while Sunny rested beside her bed. Every creak of the house made her wonder if someone was outside. Just after sunrise, she met Oliver in the garden. "He knows you found the journal," Oliver said quietly. "From now on, you can't tell anyone about it." "Who is he?" Emily asked. Oliver looked toward the old mansion. "His name is Richard Hawthorne. His family has wanted this land for decades. They've made your grandfather countless offers, but Thomas has always refused." Emily frowned. "What makes this place so valuable?" Oliver didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the center of the garden. "Help me clear those rose bushes." For nearly an hour, they worked side by side, pulling weeds and cutting away thick vines. As the overgrown roses disappeared, an old circular stone pattern appeared beneath the soil. "It wasn't here before," Emily whispered. Oliver smiled faintly. "It was always here, nature just hid it." Sunny suddenly began barking. He scratched furiously at the middle of the stone circle until one loose stone shifted out of place. Emily knelt and pulled it free. Beneath it was a small metal box, blackened with age. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside were several faded photographs, a silver locket, and a folded letter sealed with blue wax. The envelope had only 3 handwritten words. "For Emily Carter." Emily stared in disbelief. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Lily died 50 years ago." Oliver looked just as shocked. "She couldn't have known your name." Emily carefully opened the letter. Inside was only one sentence. "If you found this, the garden has chosen you." Before either of them could speak, a loud crack echoed through the garden. A tree branch crashed onto the path just a few feet away. It hadn't fallen on its own. Someone had cut it. Emily looked toward the woods. For a split second, she saw a figure disappearing between the trees. They weren't alone. Someone was watching every move they made. And now they knew Emily had opened the box. Emily's heart pounded as she stared toward the trees. The figure had vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only silence behind. Sunny barked and pulled against his leash, desperate to chase whoever had been hiding there. "Stay!" Emily called. The dog stopped, but his eyes remained fixed on the forest. Oliver picked up the fallen branch and examined the clean cut across its base. "This wasn't an accident," he said grimly. "Someone wanted to scare us." Emily looked down at the mysterious letter still clutched in her hand. "How could Lily know my name?" "I don't think she did," Oliver replied. "I think she believed the right person would eventually find the garden. Somehow she trusted that person would understand." Emily slipped the letter, photographs, and silver locket safely into her backpack. When she returned home, she found her grandfather sitting quietly on the front porch, staring across the fields. "You were in the garden again," Thomas said without looking up. Emily hesitated before sitting beside him. "Grandpa, who was Lily Harper?" Thomas's expression changed instantly. The color drained from his face. "Where did you hear that name?" "I found her journal." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Thomas let out a slow breath. "Lily was my best friend." Emily blinked in surprise. "You knew her?" "We grew up together. She loved that garden more than anyone." "What happened to her?" Thomas looked toward the setting sun. "She disappeared one autumn afternoon. The entire town searched for weeks, but they never found a single trace of her." "Do you believe she ran away?" He shook his head. "No." "Then what do you believe?" Thomas's eyes filled with regret. "I believe someone made sure she never came home." Before Emily could ask another question, an engine roared outside the property. A construction truck stopped beside the front gate. 2 workers climbed out and began placing bright orange stakes into the ground. Emily hurried toward them. "What are you doing?" One of the workers unfolded a map. "We've been hired to survey this property." "For what?" The man pointed toward the old garden. "A commercial development." Emily froze. "If the permits are approved, everything behind that fence will be demolished." She turned toward her grandfather. Thomas stood silently on the porch, his hands trembling. He whispered words Emily had never expected to hear. "They've finally come for the garden." Emily looked toward the iron gate. For 50 years the garden had survived. Now it was running out of time. Emily ran toward the surveyors before they could place another marker in the ground. "You can't do this!" she shouted. One of the men lowered his clipboard. "We're only surveying the land, ma'am. No decisions have been made yet." "But this garden is part of our property." The man offered a sympathetic smile. "If the sale goes through, it won't be for much longer." Emily looked back at her grandfather. Thomas stood motionless on the porch, his shoulders slumped with quiet defeat. That evening, she found him in his study, surrounded by dusty boxes and old family photographs. "Grandpa," she said softly, "are you really going to let them destroy it?" Thomas removed his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. "I've spent 50 years protecting that garden." "Then why give up now?" "Because Richard Hawthorne owns nearly everything around Maple Hill. He has lawyers, money, and influence. I have an old house and memories." Emily reached into her backpack and placed Lily's silver locket on the desk. "I also found this." Thomas picked it up carefully. The moment he opened it, tears filled his eyes. Inside were two tiny photographs. One showed Lily as a little girl. The other showed a teenage Thomas standing beside her, both smiling beneath the old oak tree. "You were more than friends," Emily whispered. Thomas nodded. "I loved her." Silence filled the room. "I wanted to ask her to marry me one day," he admitted. "But she disappeared before I ever had the chance." Emily gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're going to find out what happened." Before Thomas could answer, Sonny began barking wildly outside. Emily rushed to the backyard. The garden gate was wide open. She was certain she had locked it. She grabbed a flashlight and hurried inside. The moonlight stretched across the overgrown paths as Sonny raced ahead. Near the broken fountain, he stopped and barked at the ground. Fresh dirt had been scattered everywhere. Someone had been digging. Emily knelt beside the disturbed soil. Half buried beneath the dirt was an old wooden sign. She pulled it free and brushed away the mud. Carved into the weathered wood were 5 words. "The truth lies below the roots." Before she could react, a loud crash echoed from the greenhouse. Emily spun around. A shadow darted through the broken doorway and disappeared into the darkness. Whoever was searching the garden, they were now looking for the same secret she had just uncovered. Emily gripped the wooden sign as her flashlight swept across the broken greenhouse. The shadow had disappeared, leaving only the sound of leaves rustling in the night breeze. "Who's there?" she called. No answer. Sonny ran inside, sniffing the cracked floor before stopping near a row of broken flower pots. He barked twice, then looked back at Emily. She followed him and noticed fresh muddy footprints leading to the back wall. One print was larger than the others and had a deep zigzag pattern on the sole. "Whoever was here left in a hurry," she whispered. The next morning, Emily showed the footprints to Oliver. His face grew serious. "I've seen those boot prints before." "Where?" "They belong to Richard Hawthorne's head groundskeeper. He has worked for the Hawthorne family for years." Emily's stomach tightened. "So Richard really is searching the garden." Oliver nodded. "He believes something valuable is hidden here, but he doesn't understand what he's actually looking for." Emily looked at the wooden sign again. "The truth lies below the roots. There has to be another clue." Oliver pointed toward the massive oak tree in the center of the garden. "If Lily wrote those words, that's where I'd start." Together, they cleared away thick roots and loose soil around the ancient tree. After nearly an hour, Emily's shovel struck something solid. Clang! She knelt and brushed away the dirt. A flat stone slab appeared beneath the roots with a small iron ring in its center. Oliver helped her pull it open. A cool draft rose from below. Hidden beneath the tree was a narrow stone staircase leading into darkness. Emily switched on her flashlight. "I can't believe this." Oliver stared into the tunnel. "I've cared for this garden for 40 years, and I never knew this was here." They slowly descended the worn steps. At the bottom was a small underground room, untouched by time. Shelves lined the walls, covered with dusty jars, gardening tools, and dozens of rolled paintings. Emily carefully opened one. It showed the garden exactly as it had looked 50 years earlier, full of colorful flowers and smiling children. Another painting revealed Lily standing beside Thomas. Then Emily unrolled the largest canvas. Her breath caught. It showed Richard Hawthorne's father standing in the garden, arguing with a man Emily recognized instantly. It was her great-grandfather. Painted across the bottom in Lily's handwriting were 7 chilling words. He saw everything. He knows the truth. Emily looked at Oliver in disbelief. The mystery wasn't just connected to Lily anymore. It was connected to her own family. Emily carefully rolled the painting back up, her hands trembling. Until now, she had believed she was uncovering someone else's story. But seeing her own great-grandfather in Lily's painting changed everything. She looked at Oliver. My family was part of this? Oliver nodded slowly. I was afraid this day would come. You knew? I knew pieces of the truth, but not all of it. Lily never told anyone everything. She believed the answers would reveal themselves when the time was right. Emily looked around the hidden room. Dust covered the shelves, but everything had been carefully arranged, as if someone had planned for it to be found one day. Sonny wandered into a corner and began sniffing an old wooden cabinet. He pawed at the bottom drawer until it slid open. Inside was a bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Emily untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter. It was addressed to her great-grandfather. If anything happens to me, don't let them destroy the garden. The truth is safer here than it is in their hands. There was no signature, but Emily recognized Lily's handwriting immediately. She reached for the next letter when a folded newspaper clipping slipped onto the floor. The headline read, Local girl still missing after 30 days. Below it was a black-and-white photograph of Lily. Emily swallowed hard. She wasn't forgotten, she whispered. No, Oliver replied. The town never stopped looking. As Emily gathered the letters, she noticed something unusual. One envelope was still sealed. Across the front, written in neat blue ink, were the words, To whoever finds this room. She carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single page. The person responsible for my disappearance isn't the one everyone suspects. They wear a friendly smile, attend every town meeting, and pretend to care about Maple Hill. If you're reading this, don't accuse anyone until you find the final piece of proof. It's hidden where every spring begins. Emily read the last sentence twice. Where every spring begins? She asked. Oliver's eyes widened. I know exactly what she meant. Before he could explain, Sonny started barking furiously at the tunnel entrance. Heavy footsteps echoed from the stone staircase. Someone was coming down. Emily quickly turned off her flashlight. The underground room fell into complete darkness. A beam of light appeared at the top of the stairs. Then a man's voice broke the silence. I know you're down here. It wasn't Richard Hawthorne. It was someone Emily had trusted from the very beginning. Emily held her breath as the flashlight beam slowly moved across the underground room. Sonny let out a low growl but stayed close to her side. The footsteps stopped just a few feet away. Emily, the voice called gently, you don't need to hide. She recognized it instantly. It was Sheriff Daniel Brooks. Relief washed over her for only a second before Lily's letter echoed in her mind. They wear a friendly smile and pretend to care about Maple Hill. Emily stepped out from behind the shelf. How did you find us? The sheriff lowered his flashlight. I've been following Richard Hawthorne's men. When I saw fresh tracks leading into the garden, I came to make sure you were safe. Oliver studied him carefully but said nothing. Emily wasn't sure who to believe anymore. The sheriff noticed the old letters in her hands. Those belong in the evidence room, he said. Let me take them. Emily instinctively pulled them closer. I think I'll hold on to them. For a brief moment, the sheriff's friendly expression disappeared. It returned so quickly that anyone else might have missed it. Emily, he said calmly, this investigation could become dangerous. So could giving these to the wrong person. Silence filled the room. Finally, the sheriff stepped aside. Be careful, he said before climbing back up the stairs. Only after his footsteps faded did Oliver speak. You saw it too. Emily nodded. He wasn't acting like someone trying to protect evidence. Oliver looked toward the sealed spring marked on an old map hanging from the wall. We're running out of time. The next morning, Emily, Thomas, Oliver, and Sonny followed the map deep into the woods behind the garden. After nearly an hour, they reached an abandoned stone spring hidden beneath thick vines. This is where Maple Hill began, Thomas whispered. Sonny suddenly started digging beside the crumbling stone wall. Within minutes, his paws uncovered a small metal box. Inside was a cassette tape wrapped in waterproof cloth. A note attached to it read, "Play this only in front of the entire town." Thomas stared at it in disbelief. "Lily recorded everything?" Emily smiled for the first time since arriving in Maple Hill. "We finally have the proof." But as they turned to leave, they found they weren't alone. Richard Hawthorne stood on the trail with two men behind him. His eyes were locked on the metal box. "You've made this much harder than it needed to be," he said coldly. Then he held up a set of car keys. "Your grandfather won't be coming home unless you hand me that tape." Lily's voice filled the room, soft but steady despite the crackling of the old cassette. "My name is Lily Harper. If you're hearing this, it means someone finally cared enough to uncover the truth." Everyone listened in silence. "I wasn't kidnapped. I wasn't trying to run away. The day I disappeared, I witnessed an argument in the garden. Richard Hawthorne's father tried to force Thomas Carter's father to sell this land. When he refused, threats were made. I recorded everything because I was afraid no one would believe me." Emily looked at her grandfather. Tears rolled down his face. The recording continued. "I left my journal and these recordings hidden in the garden because I believed someone honest would find them one day. If that person is listening now, thank you for protecting the truth." The tape ended with a long, quiet hiss. No one spoke for several moments. A week later, the entire town gathered in Maple Hills Community Hall. The sheriff presented Lily's journal, the letters, photographs, and the cassette recording. After reviewing the evidence, the investigation into the decades-old case was officially reopened. Richard Hawthorne's attempts to pressure the Carter family into selling the property were exposed, ending his plans to redevelop the land. For the first time in 50 years, the Forgotten Garden was no longer a place of whispers and fear. Volunteers arrived with shovels, flowers, and fresh hope. Families planted roses, children painted new signs, and neighbors who had barely spoken in years worked side by side. Emily smiled as Sonny chased butterflies across the freshly cut grass. Her grandfather stood beside her. "Your mother would have been proud of you," he said quietly. Emily looked around the blooming garden. "I think she already knew I'd find something beautiful." Months later, Maple Hill officially reopened the garden as a public memorial dedicated to Lily Harper and to everyone whose voices had been ignored. At the entrance, a simple wooden plaque carried one sentence Emily chose herself. "Truth grows where courage is planted." Visitors came from across the country, not because of a mystery, but because of the hope the garden represented. As the sun set, Emily placed fresh flowers beneath the old oak tree where everything had begun. She smiled. She had come to Maple Hill believing she had lost her home forever. Instead, she discovered a new one, and gave an entire town its future by finally giving its past the chance to be heard.